The Good Friday service, especially being in the ministry, because it reminds me a lot of having a memorial service, a memorial for those that have gone on before us. I know that Andrew mentioned the lilies, and I'm grateful that we have that opportunity each and every year to be able to have lilies to represent those loved ones that have gone on before us. How many know somebody that you were intimately close with that is no longer here on this earth that has gone on before us? Look, all over this room, that we all have someone that we are thinking about this Easter season, that we think about that's gone before us. And if you remember and recall those services, you'll remember that there was a lot of good things that were shared and said about each and every one of those loved ones. They've left us a heritage. They left us a lasting impression. I know some of you have come up to me already today and mentioned the picture I put up on Facebook of my grandfather, my dad, and my uncle and myself from I believe it was 87 is what I came up with, Kimmy. I'm not positive, but I think that was right. And I had to laugh in reminiscing about those times because I'm grateful that I've had people that have gone on before me that have left me lasting impressions, left me memories. My grandmother is in the back. I know I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for two grandfathers that exampled what it was to be strong, godly men. They did it in different ways, but they did it the ways that I hope to attain as I get older with my own children. So when you think of Good Friday, that's how I put it into context. I put it in the perspective of it's almost a memorial service. And the one thing that's easy to do on a memorial service with Jesus is to talk about good things. How many know there's a lot of good to talk about when we're talking about the one that went to that cross for each and every one of us? And today I just want to share a few things about Good Friday with you all that I believe Jesus left with us. How many know it's wonderful when someone leaves a lasting impression in our lives of something that we could go, I remember what they were teaching us, that I can example that the rest of my life. And that's what Jesus did for us on Good Friday. If you've got your Bibles, you know I like to do this, raise them up, wave them around. It's good to see Bibles in the house of God. I know some of y'all were coming from work, so you might not have had a chance to go home and get it. But if you've got your Bibles, turn to the book of Luke and turn to the chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. And beginning in verse 41, we read not about the cross. Where I want to begin today is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Luke chapter 22, beginning in verse 41. And Jesus withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. On Good Friday, the first thing that I want to remember about these events and the person of Jesus Christ is that everything about Good Friday begins with will. It begins with will. What do I mean by that? Each and every one of us is born with self-will. Some of us, it's stronger than others, but we all have it. We all have that desire to do what we want to do when we want to do it. And the first thing that I learned about with looking at Good Friday is that we have to begin with our will, and we have to understand this word, submission. Good Friday begins with submission. What is submission? It's saying what Jesus said, not my will, but God, your will be done. I've got two little boys. You all know them. You've all seen them. I love Dominic and Jonah. I am privileged to be their dad. And one thing that I am learning, especially as they've been able to get older and talk a little bit more, is that they were born with self-will. I know that's a shock because coming from their father, how could they have such self-will? But they have it. It's there. And I battle it every day. Not your will, but mine be done, Dominic Carter. Not your will, but mine be done, Jonah Thomas. I have to tell them what needs to accomplish. And anybody that's got kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's tough to get them to line their will up with mine. But how many know when I say, don't climb up on the counters? That's my will. If they do their will and climb on the counters, what's going to happen? inevitably they're probably going to fall and get hurt. Don't eat all that cookies. Don't eat all those cookies. What happens if they eat all those cookies? They get sick to their stomach. Why am I sharing these things? Because we could go, oh yes, not my will, but yours be done, Father. It's a lot harder when you realize we're just like those kids. We have a will that is tough, and we have to line it up with our Father's will, because it's our Father's will that's going to keep us safe. It's our Father's will that's going to keep us protected. It's our Father's will that's going to lead us to a destiny of eternal reward. And Jesus understood that in the garden. He said, look, I've got a will. I've been born into the flesh, but God, for the sake of eternity, not mine, but yours be done. How can that be accomplished? How do we get rid of our will so that God's will be done? Well, we see an example there for us. It's through prayer. Jesus knelt down and began to pray. On the eve of his greatest decision, on the eve of eternity, Jesus prayed so hard that he sweat blood. When we have to make decisions that are life-changing, when we make decisions for the sake of Christ, we need to put it to prayer. Some of our wills we can submit easily. Other of our self-will takes us praying so hard that we may end up sweating blood because it's hard to break some of those desires. But wherever the desire is that is not lining up with God's will, whatever it is, we need to put it to prayer. Put it to prayer. So Good Friday begins with prayer. Moving over to Luke chapter 23, we see this beginning in verse 33. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, and on the right and on the other on the left. But Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Good Friday begins with solving will through submission. It continues through forgiveness. What is forgiveness? Just as point 1 was submission, point 2 is sight. Forgiveness is sight. What do I mean by that? It's having the proper perspective on the world around us. In layman's terms, it's not being a know-it-all. What do I mean by that? Jamie and I got signed up to be a part of the Quiz Bowl in Warsaw. There were 57 teams in Warsaw area that all converged on the high school to do a Quiz Bowl. We finished 56th, I think, out of 57 teams. We were really bad. And it was a humbling experience for me to realize just how much I did not know. Being a part of this Quiz Bowl was humbling. But one thing I learned really quickly, if you say something confidently enough, people will follow. And I led us astray 5 or 6 times because I said it bold enough to believe I knew the answer, only to have the moderator say, I was wrong. That happened a lot that evening. But why am I bringing this up? Because that was kind of a knock to my pride. I thought I knew what happened in the year 2015. Apparently, I did not know what happened at all in the year 2015. Why am I sharing this? Because how many know we think we're right all the time? And we can either say it verbally or we can live it by just our actions, that we are confident enough that we know we are right. But it takes a lot to have perspective that there's a world that is bigger than us. It takes perspective to realize sometimes we're wrong. It takes big perspective to realize someone else is wrong and not correct them. Have you ever been around those people that they're wrong and you want so badly to say you're wrong, but that's not going to do anything to help the situation? Have you ever been there, done that, got the t-shirt? Yeah. I battle this a lot in my own life. I like to feel like I have answers. And I like to tell people that I have answers. But one thing I have learned in 36 years of existence, I don't have a lot of existence of answers. Who has all the answers? God. And who is not a know-it-all? God. Because Jesus looked at this crowd of people that was putting him onto a cross and said, you know what? They're wrong. They don't know who I am. but I have to do this for their benefit. So even though they're clueless, even though they are stubborn, even though they are ignorant, not my will but yours be done. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Forgiveness is what allows us to have proper perspective on the world around us. Telling someone they're wrong is never going to solve anything. Forgiving them is what leads to eternal reward. Jesus Christ exampled on Good Friday not only submission, but proper perspective. Not telling these people, you're nuts, don't put me on this cross, I'm God. No, he said, you got to do it, I forgive you. Which leads me to number 3. Good Friday begins with will, submission. It continues through forgiveness, sight. But it concludes in trust. Luke chapter 23, beginning in verse 46. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had happened, he began praising God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. Jesus allowed himself not just to be hung on a cross. At any given point, he could have brought down angels to get him off that cross. He allowed there to be the trust in the Father to surrender. To surrender. How many know what a trust fall is? If you don't, it's basically, this is how little trust I have. I'm going to pick the 2 strongest guys. I'm like Carl and Mike. If I brought Carl and Mike up here, because honestly I don't trust the rest of you to hold me, and I stood here and they stood behind me, I would trust that if I fell backward, that they would be there to make sure I didn't hit the floor. That's a trust fall. If you've never done it before, it's scary. I have done them. Now, it's the most awkward, weird feeling to be there and go, I believe there's 2 people back here that are going to catch me, but I'm trusting this person that's pushing me that those people are really ready to get me. And you're just free falling. Now, why am I sharing that? Because Jesus understood at the cross that he would trust God's perfect will to surrender his life. And if you look over in John chapter 19, I'm sure it'll be on the screen if you don't turn as fast as I do. But John chapter 19, verse 30. It says this, therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. What was he meaning when he said that? And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. What did that mean? It meant that he surrendered everything. It's finished. I have nothing left to give. God, I'm falling straight back into your arms. And by doing that, he finished it like this. The cross finished like this. What is this? Why am I doing this? If you look, the way the cross is formed, his arms were permanently left wide open. When he said it was finished, his arms were left wide open. Why do I bring a point to that? Because his surrender was permanently sealed symbolically on a cross. Surrender to who? To God. He gave everything to God. No matter what you're going through in your life, no matter what situations, circumstances, etc. go on, if we can surrender everything to God, he's the only person we can trust. And it's also a permanent sign of what else? Not only surrender. How many know if a police officer came in here and said, freeze, we surrender, right? But there's more to that than this. If Dominic or Jonah walks into a room, what's the first thing I do? Am I surrendering to my kids? Well, now that's true. Sometimes I do surrender to them because they just overpower me with pillow fights. But that's not what I'm doing. When I do this, what is this? It's trying to get an embrace. It's acceptance. The cross is not just there for surrender to God, but by surrendering to God, now we have acceptance for all. Jesus Christ on the cross left us a symbol, not only that he had surrendered his will to God, but that he accepted all of us. His arms are permanently wide open for the entire world to come embrace him. We are his children. We are the ones that he desired to save. He understood that, number one, he had to submit his will for God's greater purpose. That he had to have the perspective not to live in that moment when everybody was coming against him, but to see the bigger picture of what God had. And by having that perspective, that sight, he was then able to surrender so that through him, all of us could be accepted. I said this a lot over the last couple of weeks whenever I talk about things of the Lord, and that is having kids. I can't fathom the sacrifice that God the Father allowed to take place through his son, Jesus Christ. But as a father, and now having kids of my own, it has validated everything about my faith. Because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if God the Father sent his only son to die on a cross in that fashion, there must not be any other way to heaven but through him. Don't ever tell me that it doesn't matter if you believe in Jesus or not. Jesus wouldn't have been sent here if it wasn't for a purpose. And thank God that Jesus, as not only God the Son, but the Son of God, understood what it was to submit to that will, to have the perspective of this world, and to surrender so that we might all be accepted. We started a tradition a few years back, and I'm grateful for it, of the cross, where we take a nail and we hammer it into the cross, symbolic of the things in our lives that we need to give over to God. For some of us, it's symbolic of the sin that's got in our way of relationship with God. For others, it's just something that's in your life that you just want to put it on the cross. Whatever that might be today, we've decided to add one other element today, and you'll see it over there. We have the bread and the wine. It's not actual wine, it's grape juice. It's noon, guys, it's way too early. But it's symbolic of what that sacrifice was all about. Now, why am I sharing this? Because I think it's equally important that today, as we nail things into the cross, that then we remember what that sacrifice did for us, because now we can